Welcome, everyone, to the October edition of 100 Pictures of Honey. I have some sad news tonight, and that is that Joan Kwon Glass will not be able to join us. He had a family emergency regarding a pet and really wishes she could be here. So before we get started this evening, just as a kind of a tribute to Joan, because Joan is not only a good friend, she is an amazing poet whose new book just recently came out and is unbelievably amazing. Um, and so I'm going to share a poem from her new book, which is Daughter of Three Gone Kingdoms, with cover art by Megan Merchant, one of our other poets this evening. So it's like a double treat. I'm going to read Joan's poem, Even the Moon. My mother has never had alcohol and never finishes her dessert. Sometimes I wonder if this is why we can't understand each other. She wants a daughter so small the night won't claim her. I want to know a version of her that consumes more than her body wants, insists on being uncomfortably full. I devour the sweets she rejects with a wave of a hand and an oh, I couldn't possibly. Have you ever seen a bird pick through a bowl of seeds, pecking and scattering them with such fury that there are more on the cage floor than in her own belly? Have you ever met a mother who was not a cage? In her womb, I swelled as close to the surface of her as I could without breaking through. Maybe I'm the way I am because I need to know how much my seams can hold. Even the moon slivers herself. And that's one of Joan's poems from Daughters of Three Gone Kingdoms. If you don't have the poem, please do yourself a favor and order this book. It's stunning. Uh, and we have a little announcement to make later in the reading that also will involve Joan and Megan. So, little teaser for later. But for now, we are going to get started with our two wonderful, wonderful readers who have, happily told to take more time this evening. And hopefully they will do so to share their wonderful words with you. Um, we are going to start with KB Brookins. I first became familiar with KB's work through their book Freedom House, their poetry book Freedom House, which is wonderful, and had been following KB in social media and reading their work online, and then finally had the pleasure of hearing them perform their work from their hybrid memoir Pretty at AWP this year at the Sundress reading, and got to meet them. And their writing is spectacular, and they are also a delightful person, which I was happy to find. It's always nice to to know when you meet a poet that you love that they're also a really cool person. And so I'm going to place all of the pertinent bio information, website information, and where to buy KB's book in the chat. And then I'm going to turn it over to KB. It's all yours.
Yo, can everybody hear me? Can everybody see me? Yes, no, maybe so. Okay. I want to first say it is a Tuesday. It's 6:36 where I am. Yeah, you could be doing literally anything else, and I'm very grateful that you're in this Zoom room with me, listening to poetry and pretty soon here a memoir. Yes, definitely shout out to Joan Kwon Glass. Really sad that she wasn't able to make it today, but I'm sure she is here with us in spirit. And Donna, thank you so much for making the space for us tonight to kind of share. I'm gonna read a little bit from my memoir, Pretty. One thing that you'll learn pretty quickly is I write prose in a poetic way, right? So what that means is just like stay with me. You know what I mean? Be okay with being lost. Let the language like wash over you. And also like don't be afraid to laugh. Sometimes life is funny, right? So sometimes we must laugh at the absurdity of it all. At the absurdity of gender, at the absurdity of race, etc. I'm gonna read like some splices of a piece that is in the book called Until I Wasn't. I'm gonna read this and then I'm gonna read another thing and then another thing, and then I'm gonna give the floor to Megan, who's I'm sure gonna blow all of our minds. So, until I wasn't. Before the Texas heat could cut through bodies like glass, there was a nighttime breeze. My mother felt a rumble in her belly that sent her hurling over a toilet seat. Dunks of upchuck getting stuck in her hair. Sure, she gotten food poisoning or a bug that upset her stomach before, but this rumble was different. It stayed often. It felt unprecedented for her still growing 17-year-old body, so she hurried to get a pregnancy box from the pharmacy that is now an apartment complex. She took round trips to the bathroom, each one more sobering than the other. After peeing on three different sticks and spending minutes anxiously twiddling thumbs on her childhood bed, two red lines stood in for the inevitable: pregnant. These lines were confirmation of what she already knew, but sometimes someone or something else needs to say it. This was the end of her Black girlhood. This was the beginning of her sweet Black girl. Before she could count the days between the formation of her new self, a self forever molded by mothering, her first ultrasound appointment came. A nurse gelled her newly plump belly and pointed at a fat backed monitor. Little lines went in and out of focus. It's a girl, the nurse said softly. My mother smiled big, then nodded in silence. That was the first sentence of a book that describes my undoing. That was the first story someone else told for me. At least I like to think that's how it went. The truth is, I don't know much about my pre life. My first thought was to start this book with some sob story about my childhood, something that made you want to tear up and keep flipping, but I don't remember much about that either. The learning how to walk, then run, the fail, then question myself, all of it is a blur, except moments that feel like scenes you hurry to forget after watching a scary movie. Unintentionally remembering little, I think, is the scariest feature one could have within their body and mind. I must confess. I spent many years making up stories about my 0 to 17 existence. I wanted my childhood to feel like the kind of thing that led to the present, so I filled in blanks. And when friends inevitably recalled their childhoods in conversation, I told 50% fiction. I wanted the kind of memories that people bring up in quick quips. The truth is, when somebody says childhood, my mind distills 17 years down to several scenes I can count on two hands. Even then, my mind autocorrects to something else when I remember anything too painful. Half those things I don't care to dwell on for longer than a few minutes unless I'm in therapy. The rest of them, I guess, I'll tell you. A year into attending elementary school, I fit in just enough. Girls talked to me only when they were paired with me in classes, and boys loved to pick me for their kickball teams. I could knock that red rubber ball out the park with my feet. To this day, despite my parents putting me in damn near every sport throughout my childhood, kickball is the only sport I was ever any good at. Every good kickball team needs a kicker that gets automatic points on the board, so I was picked first every time. Me and those happy, many shades of black boys ran base to base with nothing trailing us but the wind every time I could talk myself into being social enough to play. On days when I was too anxious to play, let alone exist, I just play in the sand or on the merry-go-round. or inside with the adults by myself, ignoring the eyes of judgment burning the back of my neck. It's not that I was a sore thumb, but surely I was a hurt limb amongst the normal girls at school. Regardless, it didn't matter when I could kick a ball next to black boys with smiles large enough to stretch twice around the sun. I sometimes smiled just because they did. Their joy, which inevitably turned into mine, pumped through my quickly beating heart as I ran fast as I could from base to base. During one kickball game in the spring of 2002, James Kendrick decided it was his duty to stop me from winning. At 8 years old, he often was the roller that called the shots. If he told a pack of smelly elementary school boys to move in one direction, they did. James excelled in kickball, soccer, basketball, the only sports one could play during an hour of recess in a mid-sized backyard length field. Everyone wanted him on their team first, except for when we played kickball. For kickball, everyone wanted me first, and naturally, because of the way we've set up the world, he took offense. You're pretty good for a girl, he'd often say, while he ironically negotiated to get picked for whatever team I was on. On this day, he intentionally played against me. He made it a goal, his goal, to catch me slipping today and win. Some urban legend claims that boys flirt by being mean, and I guess that's true, kind of. When you're a loner kid like I was, you learn to listen and see more than you speak and believe. So I watched James navigate his own journey into gender. He walked with his head as high as an 8 year old could make it and prided himself on being into sports, Transformers, and man stuff. He stayed away from girls since they had cooties, and he only ever talked about his interests and his dad. Clearly, his model for how to live life. My dad has two motorcycles, he said as he was playing Crash Bandicoot on his blue Game Boy. All the boys listened in awe, wishing they had a dad that cool. Despite us being at a private school and all the churchy adults around us trying to act like we were getting an education so much better than public school, the families of kids at our school still had public school issues: homelessness, food insecurity, addiction. At this point, I didn't know how to care at all about whether I had a dad, though I know my dad loved me fiercely. All the boys without dads at home already knew to hold it in their hearts. The envy they felt for James's dad, the brokenness they felt at what they thought they were missing. James closed his Game Boy's head and continued to talk about how cool his dad's motorcycles looked. To me, they looked and sounded like metal death machines. He was a boy all boys at school could cling to. He often smirked as he walked past me with all the boys that followed him on the kickball court. We started our game, and I played as I always did. My kick was forceful, precise. I kicked it out of the court every time. Due to James's tactful cheating, our teams were tied. He'd roll the ball when people weren't paying attention, call out, even if a ball bounced out of someone's hands. Man stuff. Recess was close to being over, and everyone was getting tired of playing. Could we just call it a tie? I practically begged. Never, he yelled, then rolled the ball quickly to my feet. I kicked with the little energy I had left, and this time it didn't go out of the park. Instead, the ball wiggled through the branches of an old oak tree. Every boy on his team surrounded it, ready to catch my unfortunate kick. Once the ball rolled out of the tree's large branches, it fell perfectly into James's hand. You would have thought he won a prize or got the biggest monster card for Christmas with the way he grinned. So pleased with himself for holding us back from resting before class. You're out, he yelled. I looked at him with no discernible expression. I didn't even care half as much as he did about kickball or anything else, but he wanted a stronger reaction. He then threw the ball at my chest to force that out of me. His throw briefly took my breath away. Think 5 pounds of rubber barreled into a 7-year-old's flat chest. A feeling bubbled up in me that I'd never felt before. It was scary, I thought, to be this upset at anything. Enraged, I kicked the ball into his chest, causing him to quickly plop onto the ground, dirt covering his body like a cloud. He cried until his dark brown face turned pink, which elicited a concerned look from all the players and adults who stopped in their tracks, wondering what had just happened. It was the kick heard round the school, all 2,000 feet of it. Once the adults shook off their shock, they came over and helped him get up. He pointed at me with tears still rolling down his face. That manly girl did it, he winced. Everyone looked at me, known to be the weird, quiet kid in confusion. How could anything I did cause James to cry like this? Other boys, especially the older ones, chuckled at his misfortune. Older girls found him a bit less interesting and whispered unpleasantries to each other. He scanned the audience, then said the searing phrase while pointing again, that manly girl did it. When his dad came and picked him up later that day, his teacher, the only teacher for all the second graders at the school, explained what had happened. He sustained no physical injuries, just the emotional injury of embarrassment. His dad looked him up and down, his eyes still red from crying on and off. Without a second thought, his dad barked, "What'd I tell you about that punk shit?" I stopped playing in dirt, compelled to just listen. "You gotta toughen up," he said to James. James nodded his bowed down head. Despite my actions, I got no reprimand, mostly because of adults' erasure of my existence. If anything, James's hatred was the consequence that kept on giving. For the rest of elementary school, James decided I was his arch enemy. Nary a day went by without a snide comment or dirty look received from James Kendrick. Little boys are a lot of things. Mean on the top of the list. This boy was one of the many reasons I hated going to that school. Even now, driving by those blue buildings when I visit my hometown awakens something in my nervous system. This man in training made 3 years of my life feel like hell. It was as if I'd shat in his Lunchables, or as if he'd left the school on a stretcher, the way he sustained his bullying and rage. But maybe I did something worse than that. Maybe I exposed that he, an 8-year-old Black boy, one of the many Black boys who used to sport a big smile, wasn't the man everyone started to act like he was. Thank you. Cool, cool. All right. Um, I'm gonna read two more things. All the things are much shorter. Uh, but yeah, shout out to bullies, man. You know, they build character. This is kind of a hybrid poem nonfiction thing that I have in the book. It's called Sir, Ma'am, and Other Things I Miss. All you need to know is I'm trans, if that's not super obvious already. And I was earlier in my medical transition having this feeling of like, oh, I like, even though I like really wanted this and I planned this out for so long, I kind of actually do miss like small pleasantries like the women's restroom because the men's restroom constantly smells like piss. You know, just little stuff like that. And I started like, you know, just writing a poem about it and making little vignettes and also lines. So, sir, ma'am, and other things I miss. 1. Black kid enters a coffee shop, stage right. They sport a graphic tee with the words, "Sugar, we're going down," and black jeans with a studded belt. The fake studs are falling, only saved by an occasional push in place by the black kid, their eyes smeared with clumps masquerading as mascara. Their eyes are blurring out everything on the way to the counter. A barista stops talking to a coworker, her straight and stringy hair stuffed under a cap that says Pole's Coffee Shop. She meets the now anxious black kid's eyes to ask, "What would you like to order?" The black kid, wanting to try something new but loving the comfort of familiar things, whispers, a PSL with oat milk, please. What did you say? Co's barista says confidently, and less confidently says, ma'am. The silence rips between them like paper, loose leaf and gone into the wind of a Texas fall morning. Sir, Co's barista says, just as unsure and loud enough for everyone to hear. The furrow in CB's brow, mixed with her searching, reaching for the right innocuous greeting, a southern hospitality, a region's oxymoron, brings black kids' eyes to a new point, a random groove in the iPad register. A pumpkin spice latte with oat milk, grande, black kid whispers gently back. Okay, is there anything else? Two, it's odd to miss embarrassment, especially when those moments, still vivid down to the touch, disconnect you from reality. Like any habit that once served you something like comfort or felt like a human saying, I love you without a corresponding despite. It's human nature to miss the violence you learn to put up with. Sometimes I miss home and then I eat a sandwich. Sometimes I want to call my cousin, tell her all her bullshit. You shouldn't look like a boy and other misgivings are forgiven, but lies have never sealed up a wound. Home is a matter of circumstance. You were born into a city who marked you by time, then marked you in other ways, didn't it? I am nothing great. Never been typecast as beautiful in any magazine. Still haven't figured out a way to love that isn't a vacant alleyway, but I do miss other people's uncertainty. You know what I mean? Three, legally black woman enters a courtroom, stage left. Their head sags like a heavy load, exploding under the pressure of a summons to jury duty. Everyone else in this room is white. Prosecution, judge, defendants, counsel, Greek chorus of people from all over the city who got the same letter as legally black woman, all white, except for them and the defendant, who has the hue of half the state. Speckles of brown, dark enough for a red cell. I mean, dark enough to be in this courtroom with a stain of innocence over his face. Nobody except legally black woman can see. His lawyer, a white man with circular glasses, the kind of white man that would be on the cover of GQ, says, do you think that cops are more truthful than civilians? Legally black woman squints their eyes at the word civilians. Yes, says juror number 8, a white man with bulging blue eyes. What about you, Mrs. Brookins? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Brookins, he says, in a tone that soothes as much as it stings. In a tone that kind of sounds like legally black woman's voice when they look in the mirror every morning before work. Legally black woman, now summoned to speak, sits in a chair, their burgeoning beard a mainstay in the mind of the lawyer who sees the F next to their name and oscillates between the choice to ignore it or uphold it as legally black woman speaks. No, I don't think cops are any more truthful than a kid who will say anything to get candy from his mom's purse. Can I be dismissed? 4, hello, blank. How are you? Excuse me, blank. Dear blank, I need an extension. Nice to meet you, blank. I don't make the rules, blank. I just enforce them. Yes, blank. No, blank. Blank, Moiselle. I started to feel old when I was addressed as blank. Please, blank. May I have some more? Blank, Elton John. Good morning, blank. Please lower your voice, blank. Wham, bam, thank you, blank. Blank upstairs. Please let blank rest. Blank Paul McCartney. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Blank. 5, Legally Black man walks up to the stage. A woman who claims to have read all their poems approaches the mic to introduce them. They're wearing a homemade black crop top, which slightly exposes a pudge and love handles. Their jeans are ripped enough to teeter the line between straight and queer. Who's to say, except a 50-word bio? Their years old sandals hold on to their lotioned feet for dear life. Tonight might be their last use. The woman, smile painted on both sides of her well meaning face, says, let's now welcome the man of the hour, legally Black man. The crowd erupts. Legally Black man opts to change his naturally reflexed frown into a smile, so fake it could be sold at Hot Topic. They made a life, some lines and a handful of good times out of a number of misfortunes. So this is a walk in the park, right? Legally Black man walks with purpose only gathered from taking life with its lifelong failures and sets the mic on fire. Once the fire department's been called and a number of expletives have been hurled, Legally Black man says to the crowd, calm with careful purpose, thank you. Are there any questions? 6. If we were in our last hours and you had nothing but the sound of my voice carrying you through the woods, created by bombs, a race war, a staged panic, brazen, raised only by the holders of dollars in ways they rationalize, giving us pain, still you'd search for an honorific to give me, a gift I didn't ask for, a way to define and historicize my voice, my voice. What devils we unearth when we speak his name. What mind games we play when we liven the legacy of Christopher Columbus. What terrible things we name in our moments of seeing. When the light is so close to us, it flickers on and we jump the customs we can't trace. I want to give this name, this gender to a flame and make it eat my transgressions for dinner. Make it feel all the shame of confusion. If curious was a viable option, I would take it. But would you let me? Could you let me? Have you ever let me be bigger than the boxes a form can hold? Braver than the thoughts a judge will ever make, heavier than a barista making common global mistakes. I want to live in the gray matter of earth, grow roots and be tall. Let my children speak truth and watch you empty every bin, light every match, set fire to everything so I have nothing to miss. While the coroner takes pleasure in warming me up, asking what happened and writing nothing down. Thank you. Cool. I am so almost done. I didn't realize it would be that long. But yeah, I got really into that one, you know? It's so fun. This act of writing and sharing things with you. I'm actually gonna read a new piece. If you like those two things, I mean, you like enough to buy the book, right? It's called Pretty. It's a memoir. I'm gonna read actually a new poem. So I do this thing where I go to a museum and I uh start thinking about death. It's happened so many times that I'm like, maybe I should stop going to museums, but I keep going because I'm really interested in the art form. But I'm especially taken when I go to a museum and like an artist is uncredited. And this happens a lot with African art, with Black art, like past like 1900. They're just like, the name doesn't matter. And I'm just like, that really perplexes me. So I was at this museum recently in Iowa City, and they had this exhibit called Alternate Paths, and none of the artists were accredited. It would just be like unrecorded artists, approximate origin, DRC, approximate origins, Zimbabwe, et cetera, et cetera. So then it started getting me thinking, like, what if 100 years from now I like spend all of my time writing all of these poems and then people like put something in a museum and it's like uncredited, right? And it like happens quite a bit. So this poem, and it is my last poem, and then I'm giving the floor to Megan. Upon witnessing alternate paths, Iowa City, Iowa. Will they strip me of my context and put my words behind plastic glass with a placard that says Unrecorded Artist US? Will the US still exist in the future I can't see? The trees fall and leaves shrivel at the seams. Is this country a project that expires soon for the sake of our names? Will they approximate my lust, delegitimize my climate anxiety, the rain I've ran in to get to the poem, the line between faint and sane I straddle on a Texas summer day or fall or winter? Will my art be devoid of a city, country, gender, mind that birthed it through a bleeding, nerve-ended body? Will my pleas fall upon ears uninterested in my autobiography? Will they wipe away my fingerprints, rename the tools I used to make my love? Is lineage a solipsistic request, a thing I am entitled to? Why have I learned to hear entitlement as a wrong song, all its notes flat on accident, its key, and the request of entitlement minor? Will they approximate my weight, the weight of my history? Will I be lost to time? Did no one write it down? Realize that this art, an act of selfish sorcery, an act of magic shaking loose from these temporary hands, needed to be recorded, needed to be fossilized in a way that honors the day it was made, that honors the conceit of creativity, the thing proposed from our minds into this plane. Sometimes witnessing is a violence. To metabolize anguish, do nothing with it, is a sin as big as the others, a divine misintervention, an archaeological site of bloody ambition, kind of like the US. I write a poem as people are erased in Gaza, Rafah, Syria, and Lebanon, in the expanding American delusion. Will they come up with new names for my lovers to appease the political moment that always boomerangs, permanent damage afflicted for folk permitted to stay in the past? Will they come up with new names for other things I love? Quirky mom and pop shops, the dialect of my people that they name Gen Z slang. Am I wrong for asking you to think of loveliness? How it is the only thing left behind? Is it still, no, is the act of love, the delight of myth making, an action that doesn't deserve textbooks? What if you don't witness my joy? The neurology of crafting a line break, so grand it makes you say, a line you summoned out of fissures that don't appear in x-rays. I didn't know I felt that way. Maybe this is an ars poetica. Maybe this is me open hearting, snipping the display of art without context, without a name, without a way to trace the names of everyone the artist ever loved. This is for my students, their eager and budding ability to fossilize flowers going extinct, to conjure the heart on their pages. Will you write down and search their names? There are so many ways to stave my anxiety. Tell me, with poetry aged honesty, will I be remembered? Thank you.
Oh, thank you, KB. I'm going to answer that question yes, based on your reading. We certainly will all remember you. Beautiful. I did put it in the chat, but in case you're wondering, if you joined us late, Joan Kwon Glass was unable to join us due to a family emergency, so we were giving our other two readers more time, so we were lucky that we got to hear new work from KB as well as work from Pretty. Um, our second reader tonight is Megan Merchant. I have known Megan for quite some time and followed her on social media for quite some time and been a fan of her work. And her work is all Megan is not just a poet, but a visual artist, an editor, a mentor. Like she contains multitudes. And again, one of those people that when you finally meet in real life, are so thrilled to know that the person that you have come to know and and love online is just as lovely in the real world. And Megan is a real inspiration to me because she's never satisfied with what she knows she's good at. She continuously pushes herself to learn new things and try new things. And she has two new books coming out, one of which is a collaboration, which I'm sure she'll tell you more about when she reads. So I'm going to turn it all over to her, Megan.
Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, Donna. Thank you for having me. Thank you to everyone who is taking their time out this evening to share this space. And KB, your work casts a spell. I almost forgot that I also had to read this evening. I was so in tune with what you were reading, so thank you for that. I am thrilled to share work from my book that just came out with New American Press, Hortensia in Winter. And this is actually the first time I'm reading from the book and not pieces of paper. So that feels really great. This book came into being in a rather unusual way. I was gifted my grandfather's letters home from World War II, and there were hundreds of them. It took my father and I about 4 years to transcribe them into a Word document. They're written in pencil on wax paper and in cursive, and oh my gosh, it was such a labor of love. And they're so beautiful. They're all addressed to his wife. And in the mix of these letters, I found one that instantly I knew it was not him. It was not his voice. It was not his handwriting. And it was so dark and really, really solemn. And I thought I just had to know who wrote this letter. And so I started this investigation into my ancestry. And I figured out it was my grandfather's great grandmother, Hortensia. And she traveled with Joseph Smith, helped set up Nauvoo, Illinois. And then when Brigham Young came into power and instituted polygamy, she bailed and went to Magnolia, Iowa to set up a new town there. And I started writing these letters to her, communing with her, and this book came into being. So I'll share a few from this book, and then I'll move on to the second, another kind of different form of an epistolary exchange. So thank you for listening. Dear Hortensia, did they bring a cat into the corner of the room when you were birthed to teach you how to clamp down complaint? You are ancestor and glyph, a hemline soaked wet in shit and faith. I wind a thread around my finger until it numbs to try and understand what it must have been like. The feral winter, a crown of unanswered prayers, emptiness unkempt. To dream of apples and grow thin on nothing but God. To house a passion in the rooms of your body more rabid than hunger. You should know. The coyotes yip your name here in dark. They are applying for sainthood. In the morning, I remove a juniper log that refused to burn, bury it with what wasn't snared, bone bits, apple core, a marrow of dark hair, untamed. And these poems are all, they're really short. They are prose poems. And in this lovely, lovely, tight little container, which felt right. They promised that you were set apart for something holy. Did you dream about oceans while you were mud stuck in the Mississippi? Something you couldn't see the banks of, like faith, salt, birdwing, a weekday sneak of sour wine. You were all scripture and scrub oak, miracles that profited man. On Sundays, I open the dictionary, look for words you might have hummed, words that will peel the generations between us. Are your eyes hazel, Do they shift in the onslaught of spring? The blue of needing another body to remind you of your own? Did you feel desire, but give it your husband's name? Winter. I was told to never write about the moon, so I'm calling it winter. A gunshot of hours, a boarded house in the woods, cicada bodies sleepless in their transparency, their shed. I sweep them under floorboards. Burial is a crosshatch of dirt over dreams. I pretend I am sleeping under animal skin, even though I'm squeamish at the sound of twigs snapping, a marching band. I tried for a whole year to avoid every living thing along the path. Then love, a heavy shoe, a flannel shirt over a chair. I watched him shave the blade, a moon, glint, dying grass, a soda can crushed in an empty room, sweet rust, the brocade of it, tempting everything I taste to wisp, webs strung high in the corners, this bow, this violin light. Thank you. And a quick shout out, Connie, RD, and Jessica, who are all in attendance, wrote the most beautiful blurbs for this book. So thank you so much. Your words are just so valued, and I'm so happy to have them on this little piece of my heart that's now walking around the world on its own. Exodus. Milk froths over, feathery in a glazed mug. I watch a woodpecker forget the geography of air, turn in the invisible, then flee. I feel silence to mean what's missing, never shapeless. Some days, love. Another round of snow arriving, another mistake I'll settle into as understanding more about what I've become. I'm looking for the word that falls between almost and touch. That consideration. It has its own airspace. The gap where the juniper was chopped is a frame now. If only the light would enter, I could trick myself into believing it was heat. Thank you. I'll share one more from this book and then two exchanges from the next. Religion. Waiting for water to boil, I paint a bird with bloody talons, the clockwork of hunger. When you were faced with more survival than ornament, was there a thicker pinch of God in your hymns? Did you let the man with the meatiest hand measure, tear the warm bread, dip into the throat of butter? I'm learning how to smudge the edges so it looks like flight. All of our rags are stained, the edges of my mouth and fingertips. We gather at our table, bless a meal. The snow settles, exhausted, as if it spent all night guarding a nest that, in the morning, proves empty. Thank you. I am really excited. So I have a physical copy of this book for final edits. It's a slow indwelling. And these are epistolary exchanges with Luke Johnson, and it's available through Small Harbor Publishing. And in going through these poems again and again and again for edits, I find myself getting so lost in them because I'm so enamored with them. Luke and I started a project together just kind of on a whim and instantaneously trusted each other. And it was a beautiful, incredible exchange. At one point, I was having a really, really hard time writing into a poem, and Luke told me, I'll hold the heavy bag, you punch. And to have that kind of a writing partner and that kind of support through the process of making a book blew my mind. And I'm not sure I ever want to do a book without a writing partner from this point forward. So it was so much fun. Um, but I'm going to share two exchanges with these poems. And please forgive me. I do stumble a bit over Luke's poems. I hear my own rhythms and my own poems in my body in a way that um, when I'm reading them, it doesn't feel like reading it on the page. I feel like it's pulling it still from these spaces, these joints, and in my marrow. And when I'm reading Luke's, I'm reading them on the page very carefully. So it's a very different reading experience, but they are fantastic. So I will start. I explain absence to my husband. There will be a day when I sit and write with fever. I mean fervor. And again, language betrays me, shanks the possibility of reaching another. Every specialist we've seen has said, in order to understand the ailment, you must first explain. My son refuses to leave the car while the other mothers honk in line, his hysterics rooted in feeling cold. I have shivers, he explains, which, in the foreign wiring of his brain, could mean hunger or pain or a tap of doubt that he is enough for this day. The weather warm, his body armored in snow gear. I buckle him back in and try to remember the lyrics to a song he's been humming for weeks now, the one I've been blurring to keep room in my head for what exactly, I don't know. War, fear, fever. Maybe I loved the word melancholy too much while I grew him, L. Maybe language is the one thing that allows me to carry the blame. I sing the words wrong and wrong again. In his letters home from war, my grandfather wrote about how, under a ceiling of streaming ammunition, the soldiers played broken instruments terribly, his fists unable to unfurl. Cold. My daughter stands nude in the moonlit kitchen, fevered by a dream, and starts to scream. Her hands are burning boats, mouth a mist of wasps. She's been doing this lately, waking when her eyes are shut and wandering out to greet what whispers, calling her by name. The doctors say they start in the mind, then move through the body, a virus eating its host. Began sometime when her mind was shaped, suspended in the womb. I want to sing a song that shatters her shaking, a psalm that sets her free. But where is the Lord? And why, when dreaming, she cannot surface, despite my desperate calls? All right, and I'm going to share. This is my absolute favorite exchange in this book. And we had the pleasure of reading it at AWP together, which was super cool. But I'm happy to share both this evening, and I hope I do Luke's justice. Like ruin. We could talk about the baby humpback who washed ashore with a belly of trash, and the net used for catching thousands of fish. How children circled to see its slick skin flake in the sun of California, and the birds, so many of them, glob flesh, then raise it back like ruin, one after the other, after the other. We could stand around watching the wonder dim as sea diminishes, while parents snap photos and point and crawl into its gaping mouth to pull out giant teeth. But yesterday, while my daughter danced in a dead field, flowers choked by soot, my son came running with a bullet in his hand. And before I had time to take it, stuck it in his mouth, and said it tasted like lemons. Kant would argue a seed of violence spreads in silence until, too late, a boy is beckoned to break apart beauty and scatter it. Then, as it blooms, his song diminishes, and all chances of goodness are gone. That night, I put the bullet in a pocket of mud, and as I planted it, heard my son cry, the sting on his tongue throbbing. Why am I telling you this? I stood before the shell of that beast on that day in July and whispered, sorry, as I told my son, spit, his mouth flooded with ruin. Imagined its mother a mile off the coast, circling, her panicked calls, nothing but shadows and shadows. Obituary. I thought of you and bullets and the husk of ruin we are feeding our children, saying, swallow, it will make you strong in the end. But I know. When I sat the other day with my own loneliness, as I have been taught, near people, but not, I listened to them ask about one of their group who was missing. Dead. Fell off a ladder. They laughed, and it was true. One man said, I hope he suffered before he passed. He should have known better. Then they swapped stories of near misses and dumb decisions they should not have survived. Plugging a router into an amp, stringing holiday lights in the rain. I guess it's hard to know which side of balance we are on until it's not. I'd like to stay on the opposite shore of cruelty for as long as I can, which is why I was sitting alone, why I'm teaching my son to swim, to keep his head bobbled above enough to breathe. The night my mother passed, I dreamt the town was flooded and she was alone in a room, wallpaper peeling, as if the print of yellow daisies were windswept, not wilting. She was waiting in a wooden chair, a concerto echoing through the walls. When I asked how long, she said, days, the water up to her knees. I was the one who carried her home. When I got home, I looked up the man's obituary, and I kid you not, he was on that ladder trying to save a cat from a too high branch before the storm folded into flood. Do you think that he tasted lightning before it struck? What if the last thing we taste of this world are lemons, not bitter, not rust, but one placed in a white bowl on the counter, the light around it loudening yellow, the rush of juice dissolving to the last sprinkle of sugar, a kindness, a single note held on a violin. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Megan. Thank you so much, KB. Um, both of your works just created these worlds that we were all swept into. And I know had Joan been here, her work would have done the same, having experienced it. I'd like to thank all of you for being here. And while Megan is here, and I see Rachel is here, we want to make a little announcement. And I'm going to put it in the chat as I tell you that Rachel Bunting, who is here, and I are starting a new literary journal whose first issue will be out in January of 2025. Megan is one of the visual artists in our first issue, and Joan is one of the poets in our first issue. And so since they were both going to be here tonight, that's the perfect time to kind of say, hey, this is coming, and share with you where to find it. We'll put in the chat again where you can find us on social media, and the website is now live with a sneak peek at the lineup and sub guidelines for the second issue. We're very excited about this, both of us as writers who find great joy in bringing the work of others to the community. That's why I started this reading series. And so we hope that'll kind of be another way for us to do that. I know a lot of people that are here are writers and artists, and so we hope you'll check it out. And I want to, once again, just so thrilled to have had both of you reading this evening. I'm going to put the links to Megan's and KB's books in the chat one more time, because if you don't have them, you need to get them. And I want to thank all of you for being here. The last reading of the year is going to be Sunday, November 24th. It'll be an afternoon reading the Sunday before Thanksgiving, and then we'll be off in December. But we'll be back in 2025, slightly different format, maybe, still looking at how that's going to work for next year. But I'm always happy to have you here when you could be somewhere else. And I want to thank you for being here, both for Megan and for KB. I'm going to stop the recording, and then you're certainly welcome to hang out, say hello in the chat, whatever you'd like to do. Thank you again for being here, and hopefully we'll see you in November. And hopefully, if you're a writer or an artist, we'll see your work in the queue for the second issue of Astralis.